As more diverse boards hire more diverse CEOs, who, in turn, hire more diverse managers, that's what counts. Hire more diverse CEOs, hire more diverse managers, that's what counts.
As President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen is one of the most powerful people in the world. Many people listen to what she says, or have to listen to what she says, since she's making the laws they have to obey. However, is Ursula's argumentation honest and compelling? Which linguistic detail should be noted when considering a speaker's honesty? Let's find out. On this channel, we look at the language of influential people. If you're excited about language, subscribe for more videos. Time to get the party started.
Dear Edwige Nuyens, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Why diversity? Why women on board?
Ursula does what political leaders like her do. She monopolizes words, presupposing what they mean, as if everybody knows what they mean. Along with inclusion and representation, diversity has become one of the most overused terms. All political leaders seem to have the same definition of the term. I'm totally convinced they've arrived at the same conclusion, independently of each other.
I was at a dinner and heard you speaking about diversity, and heard you speaking about a cabinet that was equal men and women. Today it is gender balance, 17 women, 17 men. It was clearly intentional. You've introduced a bill, C-25, to increase female representation on boards, to essentially sort of shame corporations into doing it. You nod.
That's exactly it. It's forcing a level of transparency and making people actually explicitly say what their plan is to bring more diversity into their boards.
So shaming is good. In what other areas of society would Trudeau like to promote shame? He doesn't tell us because the logical inconsistencies of his ideology don't allow it. Ursula and other leaders' word definitions are based on groupthink. People are encouraged to view themselves as members of a group, not as individuals. Group members whose membership hinges on their shared innate characteristics, despite the fact that two people who look alike can be very different from each other in terms of goals and opinions. Thus, diversity means and should always mean diversity of thought, first and foremost. With groupthink-based rhetoric, it's easier for politicians to play on the indignation of the demographics they're trying to persuade. Rhetorically, groups are easier to control than individuals with individual opinions. So when Ursula says "dear friends," what she really means is "dear allies," the us in her us and them discourse. Allies who are expected to comply.
Because all research and economic studies show that companies that embrace diversity are more successful. And this is true in business, in politics, and in society as a whole.
Such easy and strangely convenient generalizations. I'm totally convinced that we would have been told if the studies had shown otherwise. This is an extremely lazy and disingenuous way of presenting studies, presupposing the buzzwords she uses as a focal point and going straight to the supposed conclusions without considering and mentioning independent variables like who did the studies, who financed them, how does she prove that the findings indicate causation and not just correlation. She also doesn't take into account that companies are very different from each other and thus that the requirements for employees are very different. So how does she even begin to prove that her version of diversity is going to work for each company? That's rhetorical. The most important objection to Ursula's argument from authority is found when she makes her and so many other political leaders' authoritarian mindset very clear.
When change does not come naturally, regulatory action is needed.
This way, she and other leaders can shame, to use the word that Trudeau was actually okay with, corporations into implementing their version of diversity. And if the corporations are doing well, as if they weren't already, Ursula and her dear friends can then say that it's because of their diversity quotas. Could this also be how they conducted the studies that Ursula referred to? I wonder why regulations are necessary. I mean, considering how obvious everything is, apparently, according to Ursula. It's strange that companies haven't already taken Ursula's advice. It's almost as if she isn't even qualified to give this advice. I'll get back to this particularly revealing passage. First, let's hear how Ursula introduces them in her us and them discourse, as she does everything she can to play on the indignation of the demographic she's addressing as group members, as if they share the same opinions and experiences.
And still, too often, and especially when looking at top positions, we hear men say that it is not possible to find women with the right profile. Well, if you are seriously looking for them, you will find them.
This passage deserves to win this year's Deceptive Oversimplification Award. Aside from the unsubstantiated claim that men actually say this, and in large numbers at that apparently, her statements show a complete lack of understanding of how corporations work or should work. What Ursula deliberately doesn't factor in is that competence and integrity are the most important factors when hiring, that employees are skilled at what they do, irrespective of their innate characteristics. Who would want to live in a world where you're essentially judged for your outer characteristics, what your name is, what you were born as, and thus which group you belong to, according to people like Ursula? That's the opposite of equality and freedom, which is why people like Ursula frequently monopolize these terms before these terms can be used against them. Furthermore, there's no recognition of the fact that men and women choose different jobs and different lifestyles. Thus, she has to keep pretending that Western countries haven't had equality of opportunity, and more than that, for decades. Reality doesn't fit her us and them discourse.
You will find them. I know this well from experience, when I fought to have the first ever gender-balanced College of Commissioners. And look at our societies. Diversity is a fact. But whether diversity is reflected in companies and institutions is an active choice.
A choice? Really? Well, it's certainly not a choice that she wants each individual CEO to make.
When change does not come naturally, regulatory action is needed.
Where's the choice in that? Ursula knows which terms to use to tickle people's ears, when in reality she advocates for the opposite of choice. Ursula's anecdotal evidence doesn't prove anything, not only because it's anecdotal and thus isn't actual evidence, but also because this kind of balance is merely her subjective preference, and she can't prove that this College of Commissioners has been more effective than if it hadn't been balanced. I like the word balance, by the way, making it sound like people who oppose her definition of diversity are unbalanced.
We're going to spur people to actually act and actually realize, as more and more have done, as you've said, it's in their best interest.
And if they don't, are you supportive of quotas?
We're looking at different steps, but I think this is going to make a big step.
If they truly want diversity, why stop there? What about other balances that a person might feel strongly about, such as a balance between left and right-handed employees? According to this inconsistent ideology, people could make all sorts of demands, one more arbitrary than the other, and people like Ursula and Trudeau wouldn't have a logically consistent reason for saying no, because people would be using their logic, which isn't about logic at all, but about numbers that look good on paper and sound great in interviews. This victim ideology is by definition insatiable. It needs to be kept alive, because if it isn't kept alive, the privileges will end.
It has been 10 years since the Commission proposed to set a target of 40% for women on boards of publicly listed European firms. For 10 years, our efforts to put in place a European legislation have been blocked. 10 years where voluntary measures have not brought the change we need.
The change we need. The change she needs to keep the victim narrative alive, so that she can keep branding herself on it. Never mind the thousands of people who will be negatively affected by her self-branding. The purpose of the shared knowledge technique is to avoid objections, as if there's no other way of looking at it than the way the speaker's looking at it. In that regard, the adjective voluntary doesn't exactly make Ursula seem less authoritarian, as it foreshadows the authoritarian, not to say tyrannical method she's prepared to use. I'll get back to that. Ursula uses effective prosody, manipulating her voice to convey emotion.
10 years. For 10 years.
In order to play on the indignation of the demographic she's trying to persuade, reinforcing her us and them discourse. If Ursula's version of diversity is so needed, why is it that companies are doing just fine without it? Sorry, how dare I ask that question? Everybody knows that we can't let trained professionals in companies make the decisions they see fit. Ursula, who has a degree in medical studies, is one of the heroes that companies never knew they needed.
Your organization was founded in response. And you made the Gender Diversity Index to provide an objective European benchmark on gender equality.
Benchmark? I think I've heard this new management speak before.
What does the work entail? What do you do?
Yeah, so last February, actually, I went to Rwanda, which was incredible because Rwanda has the highest percentage of female political participants of any other country in the world. So 64% of their government is female. Yes, so many of the men were lost in the genocide, so it gave women an opportunity to either succumb to that or to then find some strength and then mobilize in a way that was really empowering. And I think that's specifically what they've done, which is a great benchmark for what women all over the world could be doing.
I guess it's about using the right buzzwords and platitudes for self-aggrandizement, no matter how inappropriate the contexts are.
To provide an objective European benchmark on gender equality.
Yes, let's learn about objectivity from a person who doesn't want natural change.
When change does not come naturally, regulatory action is needed.
I'm sure there's so much objectivity in this organization, especially because it seems so open to different viewpoints and isn't founded on a premise that employees must pretend to agree with in order to work there. I wonder if the totally reliable studies that Ursula referred to are just as objective.
Benchmark on gender equality.
Ursula keeps monopolizing terms with positive connotations, presupposing shared knowledge about what they mean. Equality is one of the most deceptive terms of our time. Groups and organizations use it to pave the way for special rights or equality of outcome, as opposed to equality of opportunity. Thus, it makes sense for an ideologue or pretend ideologue like Ursula to first ignore that we have equality of opportunity to pave the way for special rights.
Ladies, gentlemen, gentle them. The path to freedom, to equality, is currently being blocked by a big, heavy, almost invisible lie. The lie is not about whether we are equal. The lie is about whether our opportunities are. Now let's tear this world apart and build a better one.
Ursula's doing what ideologues have done throughout history, making discriminating policies and framing them as diversity and other nice-sounding buzzwords that they use because they know that these terms are the exact opposite of what they're promoting and implementing. Saying the words is a testament to how self-aware and cunning they are.
Among the over 600 companies in your index, 35% of board members are women. This is a beginning, but we have to get better in the European Union. First of all, because 2 of the best performers in the index are non-EU countries, Norway and the United Kingdom.
Ursula's now revealed what all this diversity is really about, presenting numbers that look good on paper for self-promotion and self-aggrandizement. It's about having the EU countries look better than the non-EU countries. And here I thought it was only about what was in the best interest of each company.
But we have to get better in the European Union.
Better at what? Better at accommodating Ursula's and other leaders' version of diversity, which is really about self-promotion. I like the word better, by the way, a comparative which makes it sound like people who don't agree with Ursula aren't even trying to do good. So to use Ursula's logic, I guess all Norwegian and English companies must be doing so much better than companies in EU countries because of all the diversity. Good luck proving that objectively. In the following, Ursula doesn't even try to hide her authoritarian mindset, which is in direct opposition to the nice-sounding terms that she's monopolized.
It is good that nearly half of the EU member states included in your index already have quotas, like my home country Germany, or like France, the only EU member state in the top 3 of your index. And these are the countries where much has improved in recent years. But the others are lagging behind. And, as you state, the glass ceiling remains firm in place at the top of European companies.
Ursula has to call it a glass ceiling to keep her victim narrative going, to reinforce her us and them discourse. She has to oversimplify and generalize. Thus, it can be men and women's different priorities, and each company's requirements for employees. Strangely enough, Ursula doesn't say anything about how the companies are doing in countries with quotas, which she unironically presupposes is a good thing. Since her version of diversity is needed apparently, it should be an easy task to prove that the companies are doing better than the companies in countries without quotas, while also considering all the independent variables. These are deceptive, self-serving statements.
If we look beyond boards, at the top leadership positions, just 7% of the largest European companies are led by a woman.
This kind of argumentation is sneaky because it's designed to keep moving the goalpost in order to make sure that there's no end goal, that enough will never be enough. Now it's not enough that companies, and even the European Commission, are led by the us in her discourse. Now it has to be the largest companies, one of the most time-consuming and life-altering jobs out there.
Boards are one thing. It is the knock-on effect that matters. As more diverse boards hire more diverse CEOs, who, in turn, hire more diverse managers, that's what counts.
But who hires the more diverse managers? Even Ursula can't help but laugh at her own suggestion.
Who, in turn, hire more diverse managers. That's what counts.
That's what counts. In companies, how many better alternatives would Ursula be willing to discard because she's preoccupied with people's physical appearance and what their name is? Her rhetoric shows that she cares about numbers that look good on paper.
Good morning.
She doesn't care about individuals, each individual company and employee. Her deceptive definition of diversity exposes how she views people as groups rather than as individuals. Each demographic is expected to behave the same, believe the same, and want the same.
We're making progress, but not fast enough. Not everywhere in the European Union, and not nearly enough. So it is clear that we need to do much more. When change does not come naturally, regulatory action is needed.
And once the regulatory action, which means authoritarian and tyrannical, has taken place, she and like-minded people can say, "See, things are so much better now." Thus, the people who've implemented it will call it a success. Talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy, which was never a prophecy at all. The logic doesn't even add up. Regulatory action doesn't follow from a perceived lack of natural change. That's merely her opinion, unlike the objective conclusion she tries to sell it as. Her reasoning is circular. Progress is one of the most common platitudes to make the opposing side sound like it opposes it.
Many of you have devoted your lives to the cause of equality. So you know what we have to do. We've got more work ahead of us. But we can also be proud of the progress we've made these past 2.5 years. I vowed to keep up the fight against the so-called Defense of Marriage Act. You've got every right to push against the slow pace of change. We're making real and lasting change. We can be proud of the progress we've already made.
However, progress doesn't necessarily mean progress just because the speaker says it does. It's the definitions that matter. Presuppositions are sneaky in that regard, and that's why I mention them a lot in my videos.
The numbers speak for themselves. Legislation works?
Yes, it works because companies are forced to make it work. Amazing insight, Ursula.
I will push, as President of the Commission, to ensure that our proposal on women on boards becomes European Union law. I've met with member states and members of parliament, and I'm confident that soon we will see progress. We cannot afford to lose another 10 years. I count on you. And together we will make sure that change happens.
If Ursula just says change enough times, I'm sure that the people she's addressing will continue to be her dear friends, fellow members of the Buzzword Club.
Dear friends.
What do you think about this speech? Let us know in the comments. See you next time.